The desert sun beat down mercilessly upon the cracked asphalt of the lonely highway, casting long, shimmering waves of heat across the barren landscape. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, yet on this particular afternoon, the silence was shattered by the screech of tires and the violent crunch of metal. A luxury automobile had spun completely out of control, leaving dark, jagged skid marks on the road before coming to a sudden, tragic halt. A passerby rushed toward the steaming wreckage, his face etched with deep concern. He approached a woman who had managed to stumble out of the vehicle, visibly shaken but miraculously upright. "Are you hurt, madam?" the man asked, his voice filled with genuine empathy as he offered a steadying hand. The woman, trembling as she clutched her arms, looked back at the ruined car. "I told him he was going too fast," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Are you hurt?" the man repeated, looking her over for any visible injuries. "He lost control," she replied, barely hearing the question as the shock began to settle into her bones. "You better put this on," the kind stranger suggested, gently placing a warm jacket over her trembling shoulders. "Now, can you tell me your name?" "Mistress Bernice Kellner," she managed to say, her eyes fixed on the vehicle. "The driver, was he your husband?" the man inquired softly. "Yes," she murmured, tears welling in her eyes. Another man stepped forward from the small gathering of local officials who had just arrived at the scene. He examined the motionless figure inside the automobile and shook his head gravely.
"Dead," he announced to the group.
"A broken neck, it appears." He turned to an assistant. "See if you can reach his coat." "Yeah," the assistant replied, leaning into the wreckage to retrieve the personal effects. "What was his wife's name?" "Her name is Mistress Kellner," the first man answered. "I will go talk to her," the official said, stepping over the debris. He carefully opened the wallet retrieved from the coat, scanning the identification cards inside. "Lloyd C. Kellner. That name is familiar." "Yeah, he has been in the papers recently," the assistant remarked, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Would you take him back to my place?" The official, a man named Mr. Friels, walked over to the grieving widow. Mr. Friels served as the county coroner as well as the local mortician, carrying himself with a quiet, somber dignity.
"Sorry, Mistress Kellner," he said gently.
"My name is Friels, and I am the county coroner and a mortician, and if you wish, I could take care of your husband until you make final arrangements." "Please," Mistress Kellner wept, burying her face in her hands. "No, no, services will not be necessary," she added quickly, catching herself. "There are no next of kin beside myself. I will offer prayers in my own way." "I understand," Mr. Friels replied, nodding respectfully. Before another word could be said, a law enforcement officer stepped into the circle, looking apologetic but determined. "I am sorry to interrupt," he said, looking at Mistress Kellner, "but I have been in touch with the San Francisco Police Department. Lloyd Kellner is wanted there on a felony warrant for embezzlement." "That is not true," Mistress Kellner cried out, her voice rising in defensive anger. "He never took a penny from the company." "Mistress Kellner," the officer tried to soothe her, but she pressed on. "It was bad mismanagement," she insisted, her hands shaking. "Mistress Kellner, please," the officer said firmly but gently. "I am not accusing your husband. I have simply been asked by San Francisco for his fingerprints. Even dead, they will not let him rest," she lamented, looking away. "They need his prints to clear the warrant," the officer explained. "It will only take a moment, Mistress Kellner." Mr. Friels watched the exchange with a keen, observant eye. He turned to the officer as they walked a short distance away. "Exactly what did Kellner do?" "He was a controller of some company that went busted until things got some frisky," the officer replied, checking his notes. "Are you handling the burial?" "Yep," Mr. Friels said. "She wants him cremated." "Now I remember his picture. People lost money when that company went under." Mr. Friels walked back to the weeping widow, his expression a mask of professional sympathy. "Thank you, Mistress Kellner," he said softly. "Please accept my deepest sympathy." Hours later, far from the prying eyes of the highway patrol and the scorching desert sun, a very different scene was unfolding inside the cool, quiet confines of the mortuary. The atmosphere was thick with tension, but not of grief. He is freezing, a voice complained. I told you that dry ice was overdoing it. He is fine, Mr. Friels replied calmly, standing over the body that had so recently been declared deceased. Shaken off the effects of the depressant faster than I counted on. The man on the table groaned, slowly opening his eyes and rubbing his stiff limbs. He could have frozen to death, he muttered, shivering violently as he sat up. Mistress Bernice Kellner stood by, watching her husband return to the land of the living. She turned her sharp eyes to Mr. Friels. Do you have the rest of the money with you? Would you mind if we got some life into him first? Mr. Friels replied with a sly smile. He is coming around. He looked at the shivering man. Congratulations, Mr. Kellner. You are officially a corpse. Meanwhile, in a bright, comfortable office in the heart of the city, a legendary private investigator named Barnaby Jones was listening intently to a prominent legal counsel named Mr. Moore. The investigator sat back, a warm smile on his face, though his sharp mind was already analyzing the complex details of the financial scandal. It would take the federal attorneys months to put all the pieces together, Mr. Moore explained, pouring a fresh cup of coffee, but the total losses are certain to be upward of $60 million. Thanks, Benny, Barnaby Jones said, accepting the cup with a nod of gratitude. How does a big investment house get away with this kind of manipulation? Simple, Mr. Moore replied, leaning against his desk. Just declare long-term receivables as profits and investors rush to your door. The recent market crunch proved it was a roller coaster ride for the stockholders. What about that Richard Stamans himself? The company president, Barnaby asked, his keen eyes focusing on the legal documents. Apparently, he took the same bath as the stockholders, Mr. Moore said, shaking his head. He is in personal bankruptcy now. Bad business judgment would be the extent of his responsibility, but his controller, this Lloyd Kellner, well, that is a different matter. Barnaby took a slow sip of his coffee. With Kellner killed in the car accident, will not proving the embezzlement charge be difficult?
And really a moot point now.
You see, Mr. Moore continued, the stockholders who have retained me as their counsel want some assurance that this Lloyd C. Kellner was not putting away a substantial nest egg during the past 6 months. Evidence points to the existence of a nest egg. Mr. Jones, we want you to find that nest egg. Between 3 and 4 million, you tell me, Barnaby mused, calculating the figures in his head. Based on the false entries already uncovered, we are in that neighborhood, Mr. Moore confirmed. We have a hunch it will be in negotiable currency, embezzlement of this kind following that pattern. Barnaby smiled gently, his folksy demeanor belying his sharp intellect. I suppose if your intention is to run, cash would be the easiest way to handle it. Well, I will leave those papers with you, and please, if there are any questions, call me, Mr. Moore said, gathering his briefcase. As I will, Mr. Moore, Barnaby replied, rising to shake his hand. Thanks for the coffee. You are welcome, Mr. Moore said with a warm smile. And good luck, Mr. Jones. Back at a hidden retreat, Lloyd Kellner stood before a mirror, running a hand over his smooth upper lip. What I miss most is that mustache, he admitted, looking at his altered reflection. He turned to his wife, Bernice. How did Stamen sound? Like it is a stall? I am not sure, Bernice replied, adjusting her dress. Loose ends to settle, whatever that means. How do the contacts feel? She asked, looking at his eyes. Getting used to them, Lloyd said, blinking slightly. Why did not you nail it? Exactly when he would have that money ready. I could not say too much over the phone, Bernice explained patiently. Sir, I will be over there later for a chat. She stepped closer to him, examining his face with admiration. There, let us see.
Wow.
10 years younger. I am jealous. Such lovely green eyes. Hey, cool, Lloyd said with a chuckle. Is not that the way the kids put it these days? As a married woman, I am tempted to make a play myself, Bernice teased, her eyes shining with affection. I am going to watch you like a hawk when we get to Hapaguka. Why cannot a woman shed 10 years so easily? She wondered aloud with a playful sigh. That is because you shed them 10 years ago, Lloyd replied with a grin. Ouch! Bernice laughed gently. Those loose-end statements needs to settle. Get over there and let him know he has got a deadline to produce that cash. Don't be afraid to tell him. He is not going to play any games with us. I don't see how he can afford to double-cross us, Lloyd said, his tone turning serious. For $1 million in cash, anybody will double-cross anybody, Bernice reminded him, her voice steady. Present company accepted, I hope. It just might wind up insuring you for $1 million, Lloyd concluded, looking out the window. The next morning, Barnaby Jones arrived at the local mortuary, his gentle steps echoing in the quiet reception room. He looked around admiringly at the peaceful surroundings. Mr. Friels emerged from the back room, adjusting his tie. Mr. Friels, Barnaby greeted him warmly. Yes, what can I do for you? The mortician asked. I am Barnaby Jones, private investigator. He introduced himself, offering a friendly smile. Hope I am not interfering with your work. No, of course not, Mr. Jones, Mr. Friels replied politely. What a pretty country you got around here, Barnaby observed, looking out the window at the rolling hills. Guess you have had some excitement with Lloyd Kellner death. Well, Mr. Jones, I already talked to some officials down from San Francisco, Mr. Friels said, his posture tightening slightly. Yes, I read those reports, Barnaby said reassuringly. I will only take a minute of your time. All right, Mr. Friels agreed, leading the way into his office. Meanwhile, Bernice Kellner was meeting secretly with Richard Stamens at a luxurious estate. The air was cool, and the tension between them was palpable. Did it go well? Bernice asked as Richard entered the room. Fine, Richard replied, pouring himself a drink. How is Lloyd's appearance? Could he get by a casual meeting with, say, an old friend? You siphoned $4 million from the company, Bernice stated coldly, her voice sharp. Lloyd's spending a half-year working on those books so he alone could take the blame, leaving you free to claim you were as much a victim as the stockholders. Our share of 25%, or $1 million, was firmly agreed to. Are you getting greedy? Don't ever change, Bernice, Richard said with a smooth, patronizing smile. Always direct and to the point. Remember the first day I hired you as my secretary? Richard, she warned, cutting him off. All right, we will talk about money, Richard conceded, waving his hand dismissively. It will take 48 hours to have a transfer down here. Now let us talk about a little flaw in our otherwise perfectly well-made plans. Flaw? Bernice repeated, narrowing her eyes. Something I don't want you to mention to Lloyd, Richard said, leaning closer. He has been declared dead. The search for him has stopped. Have you thought about what would happen if his little masquerade were uncovered? Well, we will be in Mexico, Bernice countered. His appearance is entirely changed. Yeah, but there is no guarantee that he might not someday be recognized, Richard pointed out, his voice dropping to a whisper. Now, you think about that, Bernice. Every time you walk the streets with him, go into any public place, you will never be quite sure what could happen. We intended living almost as recluses for a year or two, Bernice said, though a shadow of doubt crossed her face. All right, let us set that aside for a minute, Richard said, taking a step toward her. Did you know that I was completely destroyed when I found out that you had eloped with Lloyd? All I could think of was I had lost you. I didn't know, Bernice said, her tone softening slightly. I am touched. I am flattered. I have often wondered if some feeling for me lingered on after your marriage, Richard murmured, looking into her eyes. Are you afraid to answer that, Bernice? Well, I am married now, Richard, she said, stepping back. Yes, you are married to a time bomb ticking away, Richard warned, and there is no question it will explode. Only when? This is suddenly becoming frightening, Bernice admitted, her confidence shaking. The thought never occurred to me. With Lloyd, you could face prison, Richard pressed, seizing the moment. Maybe all of your best years taken away from you. With me, there is no hiding. There is no place we cannot go. Nothing we cannot do. What are you talking about? Bernice asked, her breath catching. What about Lloyd? He has been declared dead, Richard said coldly.
Simply think of him that way.
A dead man. I have often thought back to how it might have been. Later that afternoon, Barnaby Jones walked up the steps of Richard Stamens' grand residence. He rang the bell, and after a short wait, The door opened to reveal the former company president clad in casual golf attire. "Mr. Stamens," Barnaby said, tipping his hat. "I am Barnaby Jones." "Oh, yes, Mr. Jones," Richard replied, looking slightly surprised. "I understand you have been retained by the attorney, Mr. Moore." "Yes, he gave me your address, but no one answered the bell," Barnaby said with a friendly smile. "Nice place you have here." "Nice place my creditors have, you mean," Richard joked dryly, stepping aside.
Come on in.
"Thanks," Barnaby said, walking into the grand foyer. "I like to play a little early morning golf," Richard explained, gesturing to his clubs. "Kind of clears out the cobwebs." "What can I do for you, Mr. Jones?" "Well, you're possibly aware that my interest in the case is in trying to track down any company money the late Mr. Kellner may have been able to put away," Barnaby stated plainly. "You had a very close association with him. You got any ideas?" "Well, frankly, our association wasn't all that close," Richard replied smoothly, turning toward a beverage cart. "Would you care for a glass of tomato juice or something stronger if you would like?" "No, thanks," Barnaby said, waving his hand politely. "I just had breakfast." "Well, this is my breakfast," Richard said, pouring a bright red glass. "Tomato juice and vitamin pills. As a matter of routine, I like to have an overall picture of the case," Barnaby continued, his eyes casually wandering around the beautifully decorated room. "Now, in the last 6 months during which Mr. Kellner may have taken money from the company, were you aware of any sudden new friends, any new faces you can recall?" "No, I doubt if I would have taken any notice," Richard answered, swallowing his vitamins. "Generally, when someone plans to embezzle a large amount of money, they have to be free to move around and put it somewhere, or have someone else do it for them," Barnaby mused aloud. "Now, we have been able to establish that Mr. and Mistress Kellner stuck pretty close to home the last 6 months. Well, I will tell you frankly, Mr. Jones, the whole subject of Lloyd Kellner is becoming very distasteful to me," Richard said, his tone sharpening. "Granted, I left too many decisions up to him, and I am as much to blame for being in the hands of my creditors today. An embezzler is worse than a common thief. A phrase on trust. Kellner certainly preyed on mine." "Yes, I can understand how you feel," Barnaby said sympathetically. "I have lost everything," Richard lamented, gesturing around the room. "There are attachments against my house, my cars, paintings I have collected over the years. I have even been forced to dismiss my servants. I am left with my personal clothing and my pets." He walked over to a magnificent, large fish tank built into the wall. "I had to convince the appraiser my little pets needed their home." Barnaby walked over to the tank, looking at the vibrant fish swimming among colorful pebbles and a miniature treasure chest. "Well, that certainly is a pretty arrangement," the investigator remarked genuinely. "Thank you," Richard replied. "Is there anything else, Mr. Jones?" "I do have some other appointments. I understand that Mistress Kellner is living down at the marina," Barnaby said, turning back to him. "You think of any reason why she would not have gone back to San Francisco?" "Well, she is staying at a condominium apartment the company bought about 6 months ago," Richard explained. "It is seldom used, so I suggested she use it to kind of rest up, recover from her ordeal." "Do you have any friends down here you know of?" Barnaby asked. "Well, I count myself as a friend," Richard said softly. "I am certainly not holding against her the thievery of her husband. There are no other friends here that I know of." "Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stamens," Barnaby said, preparing to leave. "You are welcome," Richard replied, showing him to the door. Down at the peaceful marina, Mistress Bernice Kellner was startled by a knock at her condominium door. When she opened it, she found Mr. Friels standing on the threshold, holding a heavy, ornate ceramic container. "Mr. Friels," she said, surprised. "Your husband Ashes, Mistress Kellner," the mortician announced, his voice carrying an unsettling cheerfulness. "What?" she gasped, stepping back. "Please come in," he said, stepping past her without waiting for an invitation. "Just a little personal service. Delivering the urn to the bereaved wife. Final detail. Should anyone question you about Mr. Kellner Ashes," Bernice started, closing the door quickly. "Yes, we should have thought of that. Sorry you had such a long trip. Couldn't you have mailed it?" I thought it important enough to deliver it in person, Mr. Friels said, setting the urn down on a table. I do appreciate your trouble, Bernice said, reaching for her purse. There is a charge for the urn and the delivery? Certainly, Mr. Friels smiled. I will get my wallet. You might wish to rent a boat and dispose of the ashes at sea. It is a good idea. I will take care of that. How much do I owe you? $25,000, Mr. Friels said casually, walking over to the large window. Say, you have got a marvelous view. Bernice froze, her hand dropping from her purse. You are in this as deep as we are, she hissed. But no deeper than before, Mr. Friels replied smoothly, turning to face her.